So let's look at some changes in biotic factors. This is a little bit sort of challenging because a lot of the changes in biotic factors have a root cause in changes in abiotic factors somewhere along the line. So it might get a little bit confused, but hopefully you'll see sort of a general trend emerging. So just to remind ourselves, biotic means living things. So we're talking about changes to food supply, predation, disease. We're looking at pollinators, and we're looking at seed dispersal. So these are all sort of biotic factors, if you can think back to when we looked at those before. So the first one then is looking at interdependence. So this is where one species, SP is short for species, relies on another for something. It might be food, or it might be to provide shelter from predators or something like that. Okay, so we have things like caterpillars, so moths and butterflies that lay eggs on food plants. So here's our food plants, and there's our little red eggs. Let's do them. So these are our caterpillar or moth eggs. So changes in temperatures. So we have an increase in temperature, which means that plants grow faster. And you're thinking, aha, abiotic, yeah, temperature. Right, well, this plants growing faster, quite often plants produce toxins. As they grow older, they accumulate toxins for protection from herbivores. If you have the plants growing faster, they can accumulate toxins faster, and this means that they become too toxic for the caterpillars. Whereas in the past, the plant grew a bit slower and the toxins didn't accumulate fast enough to become too toxic for the caterpillars. So the food plant, even though it is growing even better than it ever has done before, is now no longer available for our caterpillars. We have things like changes in timing. Now, when we're looking at changes in timing, this is called phenology. So this is changes in timing. Now, what do I mean for timing? Well, this is where you have timing associated with the emergence of food. So birds typically lay their eggs. Let's lay some eggs then. Here's my eggs in the nest. So the eggs are laid so that they hatch. There's our hungry chick. So they hatch when food availability, things like caterpillars, is at their highest. Let's get our hungry caterpillar on the go. There he is. Or is that a point at which there's enough food and then obviously the availability just increases as the birds get bigger in the nest? Okay, so that when they are most hungry, ready to fledge, you have the most caterpillars to feed the things. All right. The problem is when we have changes of temperature, the food availability is earlier. So the caterpillars with global climate change, the caterpillars hatch earlier and they are able to respond to changes in temperature much quicker because they are much smaller surface, large surface area to volume ratio. So they are going to notice those changes a lot sooner. So that our peak food availability no longer matches. So more birds go, young birds go hungry, and you get a reduced success rate. The other thing you might find is precipitation changes. Means, for example, in the UK, stormy weather is associated with global climate change, the incidence of storms. This prevents things like, sorry, it'll increase, and it also means it would be warmer summer. Warmer summers means more food because bats eat for bats. Bats eat insects, especially flying insects, so things like moths and beetles. But they can't feed because the stormy weather means that they cannot fly, or bats cannot fly, and probably the beetles and moth cannot fly either. So they go hungry. They cannot make up the body mass required to survive a winter of hibernation, and therefore you see a population decline. Okay, so that's a bit of interdependence really as well. The last two, population size and distribution. This is affected by things like changes zone tolerance, which reduce population, distribution. If you have species that are found on mountains, you may find that in the past, so here's our like snow peaks, and then we have our sort of different biomes going up. Or climatic zones, should I say. So we have a species of insect, for example, that can cope in this climatic zone here, sort of in the lower reaches of the mountains. It's just the right temperature. What you find is with climate change, which increases the temperature, this means that this climatic zone on the mountain goes up the mountain. So, well, all of them do, in fact. So instead of being a connected population that can fly between different parts of the valleys, the area in which they can exist moves uphill. So the band at which they will tolerate, the conditions are appropriate, their food plant is there, or whatever it is, has now shifted up the mountain. And they might not be able to fly between patches of habitat like they used to be able to. It's too far away. It's not interconnected enough. They're too isolated. So we find that populations become isolated, and we see this in upland or mountainous areas, or islands. So islands might form or become swamped. And this has a number of issues that we sort of talked about before when it comes to isolated small populations. So small populations are less viable, in part to things like reduced gene pools. There may be that there's no opportunities for recolonization. If there is a local extinction. And you do not get things like the large enough meta population. So small populations are more vulnerable to declines anyway. They're not, so the overall population might be big enough, but it's separated into small little populations, which becomes an issue. Another thing that we see happening with distribution and populations is sea level rise in conjunction with human activities. So this is where we have a lovely beach. So we've got some sand dunes going down to our sea. Now, clearly, if sea level rose here, the sea comes up here, and all that happens is the dunes migrate inland. Okay, so any population that used to live in these sort of conditions just shift inland away as the dunes migrate inland. So in a natural system, the habitat will migrate uphill. However, if we have a natural system, but humans build things like seawalls or coastal defences, like hard engineering, because they are now living behind there. There's important industrial or agricultural land behind it that they want to protect. As the sea level rises, there is no space for this habitat to migrate. So it is lost because it can no longer cope with that change in conditions. There's no space for it to go. Okay, so in global climate change, sea level rise, you have a loss of habitat because it cannot migrate uphill due to sea defences. And some examples of habitats that are particularly at risk of this are things like salt marshes. In the UK or other sort of wetlands